Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar from Real Story Group. We're excited for this one today as we're going to take a look at the real story on AI agents for MarTech. Certainly a lot of talk in the marketplace about AI these days, so we're going to try and make sense of all this noise for you. And with us for today's presentation, we have an esteemed panel, our founder, Tony Byrne, our VP of Research, Apoorv Durga, and one of our principal analysts, Scott Simmons, will be taking through today's presentation. So super exciting, and it's going to be fast-paced and hard-hitting, but as always, we'll have time at the end for questions. So if you do have questions, you can enter those into the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel. And for everyone who's attending today, you will be able to get a copy of these slides as well. So keep an eye out for that from our marketing team within the next couple of days. A lot of new faces with us today, so welcome to you for your first timers, and for the folks that have been with us for many of these presentations, welcome back. It's great to see so many names on today's session. For those who are unfamiliar with Real Story Group or want a quick refresher, we've been at this now for 24 years, and what's really unique about RSG in the marketplace is that we never work for any of the vendors that we cover. We always have your best interest in mind as you look to select the marketing technology vendors that are going to be the right fit for what it is you're trying to do. So we don't speak at vendor conferences or advise them on their strategy. And if they subscribe to our research, we put them up in some upper right-hand, mystical upper right-hand quadrant or anything like that. Rather, we're just focused on giving you what these vendors do well, but maybe more importantly, what they don't do so well and where they might fall short for you. So I'm going to turn things over now to Tony as he and the rest of the team take us through today's presentation. Tony?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Super excited about this topic. Many of you have seen our Real Story Group subway map where we basically have all the different 160 vendors that we cover and evaluate laid out as subway or tube stations. And then the different colored lines here represent different marketplaces. And so you can see the sort of the lime green line, which is AI for marketing. Really interesting set of characters there, including some, of course, you know, and some others that are very specialized here. And we're actually going to be updating this map shortly because we are going to have a separate AI agents for marketing subway line coming out soon. And what's interesting about that, as my colleague Apoorv will explain, is that it's actually very little overlap between the two lines, which is totally fascinating. And we're going to explain a little bit why that is and what that actually means for you. But first, of course, a little background. You know that AI in general and AI agents specifically, there's a lot of hype around it. Many of you might feel like you're behind. We're here to tell you you are not behind, but you know, you definitely want to avoid a kind of a FOMO attitude here. And I think everything we see and know and experience and feel about this suggests that the really important thing you need to be doing now is building some internal knowledge and operational muscle to deploy and ultimately scale agent AI technologies properly. And so a lot about what we'll be covering today kind of revolves around that sort of a mandate. Let's jump into the agenda here. First, we like to lead everything off with reference models. Reference models help explain and simplify the world for us and for you. Then we're going to talk about an agentic spectrum. So this is a different approach that I don't think other analyst firms are taking around agenticity, and my colleague Apoorv will explain that. Then we'll get into the meat of the discussion here, which is really, of course, around use cases. So if you're familiar with Real Story Group, we're really big on use cases, both in terms of business alignment, but also when it comes to vendor evaluations. Speaking of which, the next thing we'll do is cover the agent AI vendor landscape from a high level, contrast it with the, I hate to say traditional, but more established AI vendor landscape. And then we'll talk about how RSG can help you with some of the dilemmas and opportunities that this technology presents. So let's kick off with some core reference models. Those of you who have been with us for a while know that we have this reference architecture for the 2020s. This is the B2C version. The B2B actually isn't too much different, at least not structurally. You have engagement channels at the top, which of course are expanding, interaction delivery environments before that. And then very critically, for many of you, this first colored row of engagement services like customer care, loyalty, web content management, outbound marketing, so on and so forth. That's where a lot of us have been investing a lot of time and energy in the 2010s. In the 2020s, we think that the shift is really moving momentum lower in your stack towards enterprise foundation services, which revolve around kind of a three-legged stool here: content and information, data in the middle, and then decisioning. And we believe that this is really investing at this level in your stack is really critical precondition for getting to scale, getting to omni-channel, and also getting to AI leverage. So we'll explain that in a little bit, but just wanted to kind of give you the big picture. Before then, we take it down into our MarTech AI reference model. So if you were on our last webinar, we sort of described this model in greater detail, but you can see it's still kind of layered, but the layers that we broke out here is getting into more details on the AI use cases. But also you'll see here over on the right, this really critical addition of responsible AI, which some of you might consider a hassle. As actually we find it's quite liberating. The second takeaway here is the criticality of foundational capabilities. You need some enterprise capabilities to really deploy AI, and in particular, if you want to take a pilot and actually scale it. Similarly, foundational platforms are definitely critical preconditions here. Having your base right of data, decisioning, and content really allows you to then exploit the possibilities of AI. Now, one of the things you'll notice here is that there's still these diverse engagement services examples and at the top. And so you want to be careful here because many vendors are lighting up AI capabilities within those particular boxes. But you want to be careful here because we argue actually that you should think about AI more as a layer in your stack, and that you ought to be particularly careful about the implications, particularly the customer implications, the compliance implications, the coherence implications of just lighting up random AI services within the engagement level. So we see AI more in the future as kind of a layer in your stack. And so that means it's really important to look at the different types of use cases which fall into 4 buckets here. I'll go from right to left. Generative AI, which of course we're all excited about. We think that in the long run, the more interesting things for MarTech are going to be in decisioning AI, insights AI, and then today's topic, of course, agentic AI. We're really talking about 2 categories of use cases. So those 2 categories are automation, agent AI automating and sequencing tasks within a platform. So that's workflow automation, or automating and sequencing tasks across your MarTech stack. So that's stack orchestration without needing human input at every step. So this gets you beyond static decision making, all kinds of goodness here we'll get into later, but we're making this key distinction between workflow automation and stack orchestration. Now, there are a set of core agent services that are really important preconditions for this. When we get into working with clients and subscribers, we've got some key checklists there around things that you need to manage, and managing agents is really kind of a step up from managing some of your other AI capabilities like LLM. So there's definitely some operational issues, certainly around agentic AI, that are worth getting into more deeply, although we're going to bypass them on this quick webinar here. So I promised you a look at the AI agentic spectrum, and for that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Apurv Durga. Apurv, take it away.
Thank you, Tony. So let's get a bit more agentic, right? So frankly, agent AI is becoming the next buzzword that vendors love to slap on top of everything. So everyone's claiming their chatbot or scoring model is now an agent, but just calling something an agent doesn't make it one, right? So we propose a slightly different question. Not is it agent AI, but rather how agentic is it? Right? So you see, agenticity is a spectrum, not a binary switch. So instead of debating whether something is or isn't an agent, we need to examine how much autonomy it has, can it really plan, how much can it plan, can it adapt, can it collaborate, can it act without being micromanaged, and so on and so forth. The danger in not making this distinction is clear. You end up buying a glorified macro and then expect it to have autonomous behavior. So we built a framework to help you assess exactly how agentic a system or vendor claim really is. So if we look at the next stage, next slide, this really explains the stages of agentic AI for MarTech, right? So this is really our agenticity model. We have defined 4 levels of agenticity or agentic behavior, and this applies to whether you are building agents or buying them. So level 1 is what we call assistive. It basically completes a task when you prompt it, one shot, no memory, no goals, simple. Level 2 is called reactive, right? So the agent follows a basic plan, responds to some context, but it can't recover, for example, if something unexpected were to happen, right? So there's no persistence of purpose in that sense. Level 3, we call it semi-autonomous. Here we see planning, tool use, partial autonomy. It can take a goal, adapt to some extent, maybe even collaborate with other agents, but you're still supervising it. This is human in the loop. Finally, we have level 4, which is fully autonomous. This is human on the loop, right? So the agent can work over time, reason about changing goals, escalate only when needed, and self-correct, right? So very few vendors are here and fewer enterprises are ready for it. And we have a readiness model that Tony will talk about a bit later. So here's the reality. Most of what's being marketed as agent AI today, it's really stuck between level 1 and level 2. So unless you ask your vendors to show you how their agents plan, adapt, escalate, etc., you risk being sold vaporware. So Scott, you've been spending time mapping out use cases, etc., by vendors. Want to take us through that?
Thanks, Apoorv. Let's jump right in. So you can go to the next slide, Tony. So an agent extends kind of the narrow focus of AI use cases, basically adding autonomy so it can act, memory so it can learn, and goal seeking so it can improve over time. Real innovation, though, happens when we start linking these enhanced functions into kind of cross-functional loops, where you get insights leading to decisions, which then triggers generation of content, which basically creates outcomes, which then feed back into new insights. So we end up with this kind of flywheel loop of an agent kind of improving upon itself. Let's jump into some like real use cases, though. So we've established 14 use case categories that you can find in our Agent AI for MarTech advisory paper that we released, I think it was last week. So if you haven't seen that, I would highly recommend downloading. We're today going to look quickly at 2 leverage new data use cases that illustrate different stages of the maturity model. A reactive agent and kind of a fully autonomous agent. On the reactive side, basically adding to a traditional AI use case, we have a workflow automation agent that basically listens to raw data feed, uncovers an insight, and then creates a new attribute that can be used for targeting. Versus, say, a fully autonomous use case where an agent orchestrates insights and added processing and generation, and then continues to listen and modify, kind of creating that feedback loop that we talked about. A quick reminder here is that not all AI use cases require agents, but some clearly benefit. So let's jump into one. Next slide. So this diagram depicts a reactive new attribute insights agent, basically listening and analyzing against kind of a raw data feed, and then applying a new attribute directly into the system when it finds the insight and understands what data should come together to produce it. In this stage, there's still a human in the loop at key points for validation and correction, right? We want to make sure that the agent is doing what it's supposed to be doing. This is fairly typical of kind of a stage 2 agent. Next slide. Going all the way full spectrum, this is a fully autonomous orchestration, right? It gets much more complex with the agent requiring access to more parts of the stack. So this is an example of an agent trying to reactivate a dormant high-value customer, right? First, it's going to detect the dormancy. It's going to find similar customers and the paths that those customers we took to get those customers to re-engage. Choose next best action. Generate personalized content out of the content systems, and then use the content in a campaign targeted specifically for this user. It'll then monitor and adjust the campaign as needed and the content so that we're kind of fulfilling that complete loop. Next slide. Reality check, right? We have not seen anyone in that run stage, right? There's a lot of talk at that level, and there's a lot of promise. And we see that that's the direction where we're heading. But almost everyone that we are engaged with is really only in the crawl stage with a lot of human interaction. And we're seeing movement into the walk phase with a lot of pilot programs. So I'm going to pass it back to Approve, and he's going to go through some of the tech itself.
Thank you, Scott. So let's take a quick step back to refresh how we see the AI marketplace itself, right? So this is our view of AI for marketing landscape. This is where most of the industry is today. It's broad, it's fragmented, and across 4 core clusters, right? So we'll talk about the first cluster later, but essentially there are 3 main clusters here. There's insights AI. These are the tools that analyze patterns, forecast outcomes, or segment audiences. Then there's decisioning AI, which is essentially think of things like next best actions or optimization logic and things like that. And finally, you have the generative AI tools. They are essentially AI tools for content, copy, creative, usually in one shot or templated formats, right? And then on the leftmost are the foundation models, which are essentially foundational for all the other types of tools that you see on the right. Now, most MarTech stacks today have all these 3 insights, decisioning, and generative in some form. But here's the thing, they're usually siloed, right? So in the insights doesn't really feed the action in real time, for example, or the generation doesn't really learn from outcomes, right? And there's little persistence or sequencing between those steps. So that's where agent AI starts to reshape things. And that's what the next slide shows, right? So this is our view of the agent AI marketplace. This is the world we are beginning to see now, right? So just a disclaimer, agent AI doesn't replace those existing tools. Instead, it just connects and operationalizes them, right? So that's the distinction. So essentially, these tools bring in elements of planning, autonomy, cross-system coordination, and in some cases, self-improving loops. So you see that the landscape here looks very different from the previous slide. There is no real overlap. We have mapped it into 4 categories here, right? So the first one is the closed CX ecosystem. The big vendors like Salesforce and ServiceNow, who are embedding agents within their own stack. You might have heard of the Salesforce acquisition of Informatica today or yesterday, actually. Then there are the agent composition frameworks, the second category. These are tools like LangChain, Crew AI, and Semantic Kernel that let you build multi-agent systems, often with deep control but huge amount of effort. The third category is the configurable builders. These are vendors like Relevance, Dust, AutoGrid, Lizer, Emma, etc. These are designed more for CX and marketing ops teams to create agents with relatively lesser code. Focus is more on configuration rather than writing code and so on. And finally, you have the RPA tool, the legacy RPA tools, who have built agentic extension on top of their tools, right? Tools like UiPath and Pega. So they have layered agent-like behavior on top of their traditional workflows. Now, very few vendors operate across all these categories. So before you invest in a platform or a pilot, it's critical to understand what kind of agent behavior you actually need, where in your stack that orchestration should live, and how ready you are to manage it operationally. Right. So this is not plug and play yet, but the architecture decisions you make now will actually determine whether your agents are scalable or stuck in a demo loop. Right. So there are so many products here. How do you go about selecting which ones make sense for you, and how do you find out whether you are ready for them or not? Over to you, Tony, to take us through those aspects.
Yeah, thanks, Apoorv. I think one other comment we could maybe double down on here is the category on the far left, the closed CX ecosystem. Those are almost by definition workflow rather than orchestration, because they only work within that vendor's environment. Now, I'm not dismissing workflow agents out of hand. They of course have value, but if you're super excited about sort of more cross-platform agents, then you're probably building them, or someone is building them for you, and so that's why these three on the right suddenly become a bit more important and a bit more relevant. And what we've seen is some of them are more and less conducive to MarTech use cases. That's certainly a conversation that we're open to having with you. So speaking of conversations, how can we help? So just to follow up on the previous slide, certainly, those of you who've known us know that we've literally written the book on technology selection using a more design thinking approach. That's worked for every MarTech technology we've been involved in over the last 2 decades, from web content management to CDPs, but also works for AI and agentic AI, which is a rapid test-based process to get you to the right technology that's going to be the right fit for you in this landscape where everyone needs to be thinking carefully about where they want to go. So our goal here would be to help you save time, certainly save costs, and make the right decisions. The other area we can help you is with an AI and specifically AI agent audit and readiness assessment. We have some specific tools around this where we can audit your readiness, provide some practical advice, as well as a long-term roadmap, all wrapped into kind of a crawl, walk, run methodology, and then deliver a multi-quarter playbook. So we have some examples of that in our advisory paper. So just a quick reminder that you can ask whatever questions you want in the GoToWebinar control panel under the questions tabs. We've already got a couple in already, so we'll be taking those. We'll be looking those over. Certainly, if you have more, feel free to chime in. In the meantime, I'll turn it over to my colleague Scott Dill, and he can talk to us about next steps.
Great, excellent presentation, guys. Really appreciate you walking us through that and breaking it down for us. And if you want to take a look at any of the research that we offer, you can always download samples to get a sense of the hard-hitting approach we take when describing what the vendors do well and where they fall short. But you can also reach out to us if you'd like to learn more about the different ways that we can help you and make some sense of this ever-changing marketplace. In terms of webinars, we have another presentation coming up in a couple of weeks around Sitecore, which should be very, very interesting. And then later in June, we'll walk through the right way to select a CDP. So if that's something you're looking into over the second half of the year, certainly please join us for that. We've also got a number of AI materials on our site, along with in our LinkedIn posts as well. So either reach out to us to get links to those, or check us out on those different channels. I'll turn things back over to Tony for the questions that have come in.
Yeah, so John asked a good question here. Can you please put a link to the use case white paper that you mentioned in the chat room? So we have a kind of a wide-ranging white paper on agentic AI with a lot of examples and a lot more depth than you saw here. John, that's only available to our subscribers, so those of you interested in that can chat with Scott. And really where we're going with that paper is just to sort of help our subscribers get an initial baseline set, and then we work with them to kind of customize it for their own experience. Later this week, we'll be doing an hour-long lunch and learn workshop on this topic with one of our subscribers, and that will be sort of basing a lot of the concepts off that. Certainly at a high level, you've seen much already here today. Now Mike is asking an interesting question here that I'll turn over to Apurv and then Scott. Mike's asking, with more agents, does explainability / troubleshooting become harder? So Apurv first and then Scott. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to, we'll have some time to take one or two more if you want to put them in the GoToWebinar control panel in the questions tab. But Apurv, more agents, does explainability troubleshooting become harder?
Yes, it actually gets, or both of them get significantly harder, especially as you add more agents. There are a couple of reasons for that. The first one is we defined autonomy as one of the key characteristics, and autonomy often leads to opacity, right? So it's difficult to debug what's happening, etc., unless you have really good tools for that. Secondly, each agent brings its own logic, memory, and tool calls. So that makes it really difficult to trace why something happened or where it went wrong. Multi-agent setups also blur things like accountability, and therefore that leads to issues with observability. So you are right.
We do see vendors, though, coming onto the market that are providing specialized tools around this, right? So, you know, all these tools are logging. It's then a matter of analyzing the logging to determine, you know, what happened or what the trends might be.
Great, and David's got a really interesting practical question here. If you are agentically curious, I love that phrase, by the way, David. If you are agentically curious, do you recommend starting with agents that are provided by current vendors in your stack, or start with some of the players, builders you recommended? Scott, do you want to take that first?
I would say the answer to that is yes. Right? I think as we saw, you know, most people are in the crawl stage. Use what you have, but also don't eliminate things if you don't have them. You know, pull in those framework tools are nice because they become cross-platform, and a lot of what you want to do is cross-platform. But that shouldn't eliminate you from, you know, using the Salesforce tools if that's what you have in front of you today.
Yeah, and there is, you know, a lot of the cross-platform obviously gets simpler when you can do agent-to-agent communications. Apurv, anything you'd add there?
No, I actually agree. It's safe and it's a familiar territory. So use them by all means, but mostly for learning. As you scale up, you will eventually need to try out some of the other vendors who are more cross-platform, etc.
Yeah, and I would just add, in some of the playbooks that we're building, you know, we get into a little bit more detail around this. It depends a lot, you know, certainly you're talking about curiosity. So curiosity is great. But if you want to actually have a plan to go from business value to pilot to rollout, that's kind of a step beyond a curiosity. In some of the playbooks that we're developing, we get into a little bit more detail there that's aligned, once again, to the specific use cases. So anyway, great question, David. Good to hear from all of you. Unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time. I want to thank you all for joining. So on behalf of my colleagues, the two Scotts, Mr. Simmons and Mr. Dill, as well as the one and only Apurv Durga, this is Tony Byrne saying so long for now. See you next time.